Welcome to Cozy Jury. Tonight's story will test you. It's messy, it's complicated, and by the end, you will decide who's right and who's wrong. But before we begin, if you value what we're building here, hit like. Subscribe if you want more of this, but only if this is your kind of content. I'd rather earn it than beg for it. Drop a comment. Where are you right now and what time is it?
I love knowing who's out there deliberating with us. Now get comfortable. You're not just listening, you're the jury. The fire's burning, the case is open. Let's begin. Jasmine Williams found the pills in his locked drawer. Devon's office. Tuesday morning, they shouldn't have been there. She was standing in the doorway of their home office in Atlanta's Grant Park neighborhood.
The morning light filtering through the plantation shutters, casting prison bar shadows across the hardwood floor. Her hands were trembling as she held the small plastic baggie, the contents unmistakable, white tablets, dozens of them, identical to the vitamins Devon had been giving her every morning for the past 6 months. Except these weren't in a vitamin bottle. These were loose, unlabeled, hidden in the back of a drawer that was always locked. The discovery had been accidental. Devon had left for an early morning meeting, something about a client deadline, and in his rush, he'd left his keyring on the kitchen counter. Jasmine had only meant to move them to his desk, a small act of wifely consideration. But when she'd entered his office, she'd noticed the drawer slightly ajar, the lock mechanism clearly faulty, probably from being forced open one too many times. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper, something she'd been pushing down for weeks, had made her pull it open fully. Inside, beneath a stack of old receipts and a tangle of charging cables, was the baggie, and next to it, a notebook, spiral-bound, black cover, the kind you'd buy at any drugstore. She'd picked up the baggie first, her fingers numb, her breath catching in her throat. The pills rattled softly, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. She'd counted them, 47. 47 pills that looked exactly like the vitamins Devon handed her every morning with her coffee, always with that same gentle smile, that same concerned tone. "For your energy, Jazz. You work too hard." Her stomach dropped. The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just her knees going weak. She'd set the baggie down carefully as if it might explode, and reached for the notebook. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. The first page was dated 3 months ago. Devon's handwriting, precise and methodical, filled the lines. Day 1, subject responding well, increased drowsiness noted around 2 p.m., memory recall, sluggish when questioned about morning routine. Subject, he'd called her a subject. She'd flipped through the pages, each entry more detailed than the last. Times, dosages, observations about her behavior, her energy levels, her memory. Notes about adjusting the amount, about increasing frequency. About windows of time when she was most compliant and least suspicious. Or the clinical language, the detachment. It was like reading a lab report. Except the lab rat was her, his wife. The woman he'd promised to love and protect. Jasmine's vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was from tears or from the sudden rush of adrenaline flooding her system. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her temples, behind her eyes. She tried to swallow, but her mouth had gone completely dry. The house felt different suddenly. The walls seemed closer. The air felt thicker. This place that had been her sanctuary for 2 years, the home she'd helped Devon pick out, the space they'd filled with furniture and laughter and plans for the future. It felt like a trap now. Like a cage she hadn't realized she was locked inside. She wanted to be wrong. God, she wanted to be wrong about this. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation. Maybe Devon was conducting some kind of research project and had accidentally mixed up his notes with something personal. Maybe the pills were for something else entirely, and she was jumping to conclusions because she'd been stressed lately and not sleeping well, and her mind was just playing tricks on her. But even as she tried to rationalize it, to explain it away, she knew. Deep in her gut, in that place where your body knows things before your mind catches up, she knew. This was why she'd been so tired lately. This was why she kept forgetting conversations, losing track of time, finding herself in rooms with no memory of walking there. This was why her students had started asking if she was feeling okay, why her department head had gently suggested she might want to take a few personal days. This was why Kesha had been calling more often, her voice tight with worry, asking questions Jasmine couldn't quite answer. That's why Devon had been acting so strange last Tuesday. She'd woken up early before the alarm and found him already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep. When she'd asked what was wrong, he'd smiled, that warm, familiar smile she'd fallen in love with, and said he was just grateful. Grateful for you, Jazz, for this life we've built. At the time, it had seemed romantic, sweet. Now it felt sinister. Had he been checking to see if she was still sedated, making sure his experiment was working? Now you might think you know exactly what happened here. Controlling husband drugs unsuspecting wife, classic case of domestic abuse. But it's not that simple, because this receipt, this notebook, this baggie of pills, they weren't the end. They were the trigger for a war where the battlefield was Jasmine's own mind, where the weapons were invisible, where the enemy wore the face of the man she'd chosen to spend her life with. What Jasmine didn't know yet was that this betrayal went deeper than just the pills. Before this story ends, there will be police involvement, there will be medical examinations, there will be testimony from experts about psychological manipulation and chemical dependency. There will be recordings, Jasmine documenting everything, building a case, gathering evidence while still living under the same roof as her abuser. And there will be a choice that half of you will call justice and the other half will call revenge. Was Jasmine right to do what she did next? Hold that thought. Let's go back to the beginning, to the very first red flag that everyone missed, to a coffee shop in Atlanta's Virginia Highland neighborhood on a rainy October afternoon, where a high school English teacher met a software engineer and thought she'd found her happy ending. Jasmine had never been one for dating apps, but Kesha had insisted. You're 32 years old and you spend every Friday night grading papers. Her best friend had said over brunch at their favorite spot on Ponce de Leon Avenue. At least download one, just see what's out there. So Jasmine had, mostly, to stop Kesha's nagging, and she'd swiped through exactly 12 profiles before matching with Devon Williams. His profile had been refreshingly normal. No shirtless gym selfies, no pictures with sedated tigers, no bio that was just a list of what he wouldn't tolerate in a woman. Just a guy with kind eyes and a genuine smile, standing in front of the Atlanta skyline wearing a Falcons jersey. His bio read, "Software engineer who works from home," which means I have no excuse for not replying to messages. Love hiking, terrible at cooking, looking for someone who can teach me the difference between oregano and basil without laughing. Probably won't happen. Their first conversation had been easy, natural. He'd opened with a question about her profile picture, which showed her at the MLK National Historic Site, and they'd ended up talking about Atlanta history, about the changes the city had undergone, about their favorite hidden spots that tourists never found. He was funny without trying too hard, thoughtful without being intense. After 3 days of messaging, he'd asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. She'd suggested Aurora Coffee on Peachtree, a busy enough place that she'd feel safe, but quiet enough that they could actually talk. He'd shown up exactly on time, wearing dark jeans and a navy sweater that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes. He'd already ordered a latte for himself, and after checking with her first, a cappuccino for her. "I took a guess based on your profile," he'd admitted with a sheepish grin. "If I'm wrong, I'll drink both and we can start over." He'd guessed right. That small detail, the fact that he'd paid attention, that he'd noticed she'd mentioned cappuccinos in one of their earlier messages, had charmed her. They'd talked for 3 hours, long past the point where their coffee had gone cold. He'd told her about his work, developing security software for small businesses, about how he'd moved to Atlanta from Houston 5 years ago for a job that hadn't worked out, but had ended up loving the city anyway. She'd told him about teaching, about the challenges of keeping teenagers engaged with Shakespeare and Fitzgerald, about the moments that made it all worthwhile when a struggling student finally understood a metaphor or finished their first novel. When they'd finally left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped and the autumn air smelled like wet leaves and possibility. He'd walked her to her car, hands in his pockets, that same easy smile on his face. "I'd really like to see you again," he'd said. "If that's something you'd want." She'd said yes before she'd even thought about it. And the way his whole face had lit up had made her stomach flip. Their second date had been dinner at Ponce City Market, wandering through the food hall, sharing samples, arguing good-naturedly about whether Detroit-style pizza was actually pizza, or just an elaborate casserole. Their third date had been a hike at Stone Mountain, where Devon had admitted he was terrified of heights, but had suggested it anyway, because she'd mentioned loving the view from the top. He'd held her hand on the way up, his palm warm and slightly sweaty, and when they'd reached the summit, he'd kissed her for the first time, while Atlanta sprawled out beneath them. The honeymoon phase had been, in retrospect, perfect. Too perfect, maybe, though Jasmine hadn't seen it that way at the time. Devon had been attentive without being clingy, romantic without being over the top. He'd remembered small details, that she liked daisies better than roses, that she took her tea with honey, but her coffee black, that she had a standing lunch date with Kesha every other Sunday at Buttermilk Kitchen. He'd integrated into her life seamlessly, showing up at her school's winter concert to surprise her, bringing her favorite Thai takeout when she was stressed about semester finals, fixing the weird rattling sound her car had been making for months. 6 months in, they'd taken their first trip together, a long weekend in Charleston. They'd walked the Battery, toured historic homes, eaten their weight in shrimp and grits. One evening, sitting on the porch of their Airbnb with glasses of wine, Devon had said, "I could see doing this forever, you know, with you." It hadn't been a proposal, not exactly, but it had been a promise. Jasmine had felt it in her chest, warm and solid and real. She'd said, "Me too," and meant it with every fibre of her being. By the 1-year mark, they were talking about moving in together. Devon's lease was up in July, and Jasmine's apartment in Decatur felt too small for 2 people and all their combined stuff. They'd spent weekends driving through different Atlanta neighborhoods, Virginia Highland, Inman Park, Grant Park, looking at rental houses. When they'd found the Craftsman bungalow on Cherokee Avenue, with its wide front porch and built-in bookshelves and sun-drenched kitchen, they'd both known immediately. Devon had put down the deposit that same day. Moving in together had felt like the natural next step. They'd divided responsibilities easily. Devon handled the bills and the lawn. Jasmine handled the groceries and the decorating. They'd developed routines, the small domestic rhythms that make a house feel like a home. Coffee together every morning before Devon disappeared into his office and Jasmine left for school. Dinner together most nights, even if it was just takeout eaten on the couch while watching whatever documentary Devon was obsessed with that week. Weekend mornings sleeping in, lazy and tangled together, before eventually getting up to tackle errands or meet friends. Their social circles had merged. Devon had gotten along well with Kesha from the start, which Jasmine had been secretly worried about since Kesha had strong opinions and wasn't afraid to share them. But Devon had won her over by genuinely listening when she talked, by remembering details about her life, by showing up to help when she'd moved apartments, even though he'd only met her twice. Jasmine had likewise been welcomed by Devon's small circle, mostly colleagues from his early days in Atlanta, guys who gathered monthly for pickup basketball and beer. Financially, they'd kept things separate but fair. They'd opened a joint account for household expenses, each contributing based on their income. Devon made more than Jasmine, significantly more actually, but he'd never made her feel bad about it. When she'd tried to split everything 50-50 anyway, he'd gently insisted on proportional contributions. "You're literally shaping young minds for a living," he'd said. "That's more valuable than anything I do with code. Don't insult yourself by pretending our incomes should be equal." There had been moments, small ones, that hadn't quite fit the picture-perfect narrative. Times when Devon had seemed almost too interested in her schedule, asking detailed questions about where she'd be and when. Times when he'd encouraged her to skip social events, nothing pushy, just gentle suggestions that maybe she was spreading herself too thin, that she seemed tired, that maybe staying in would be better. Times when he'd mentioned casually that Kesha seemed to demand a lot of her time, that maybe Jasmine should set some boundaries. She'd rationalized all of it. Devon cared about her well-being. He wanted to make sure she wasn't burning out. He was looking out for her in a way no one else ever had. Besides, the suggestions were just that. Suggestions. He never forced anything. If she wanted to go out, she went out. If she wanted to see Kesha, she saw Kesha. Devon never stopped her. He just expressed concern. That was normal, wasn't it? That was what partners did. They looked out for each other. About 8 months into living together, Jasmine had started feeling run down. The school year was particularly brutal. Budget cuts had increased class sizes, and she was bringing home stacks of essays to grade every night. She'd mentioned to Devon that she was tired all the time, that she couldn't seem to shake this persistent fatigue, no matter how much sleep she got. He'd been sympathetic, concerned even. "Maybe you should see a doctor," he'd suggested. "Make sure everything's okay." She'd waved him off. "It's just stress. It'll pass once we're through midterms." But it hadn't passed. If anything, it had gotten worse. She'd started forgetting things. Small things at first. Where she'd put her keys. Whether she'd locked the front door. What she'd planned for tomorrow's lesson. Her students had started to notice. "Ms. Williams, are you feeling all right?" they'd ask, genuine worry in their young faces. "You seem kind of out of it today." That's when Devon had suggested the vitamins. "I've been reading about this," he'd said one morning, over coffee, pulling up an article on his phone. "Teachers are under constant stress, irregular schedules. You're probably not getting all the nutrients you need. These might help." He'd shown her the bottle, a reputable brand, nothing sketchy looking, available at any pharmacy. "Just try them for a month," he'd urged. "See if you feel better. What's the harm?" What was the harm indeed? Jasmine had agreed, touched by his concern, grateful that someone was paying attention to her well-being. She'd started taking the vitamins every morning, 1 tablet with breakfast, handed to her by Devon, along with her coffee. He'd made it part of their routine, another small domestic ritual. "Can't forget your vitamin," he'd say with a smile, placing it next to her coffee mug. And at first, she'd thought they were helping. The fatigue had seemed to lift a little. She'd felt more energetic, more present. She'd told Devon as much, and he'd been pleased, validated. "See, I told you. Sometimes we just need a little boost. Looking back now, knowing what she knew, Jasmine realized that initial improvement had probably been psychological. Or maybe he'd been giving her the real vitamins at first, establishing trust, building the routine before switching to whatever the hell was actually in those pills. Everything seemed fine, normal. They were building a life together, talking about marriage, about maybe buying a house in a few years, about whether they wanted kids. Jasmine had felt secure in a way she'd never felt before. She'd been in relationships before Devon, but nothing that had felt this solid, this partnership-oriented, this like coming home. Until 3 months ago, until the morning she'd woken up with bruises on her arms that she couldn't remember getting. Until the afternoon she'd completely blanked on a parent-teacher conference she'd scheduled weeks ago. Until the evening Kesha had asked, point blank, if everything was okay at home, because Jasmine hadn't sounded like herself lately. Everything seemed fine, normal, until it wasn't. The vitamins had become part of the morning choreography, as routine as brushing teeth or making coffee. Devon would be up first. He was always up first, something about optimizing his work schedule, and by the time Jasmine shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep and reaching for caffeine, there would be a single white tablet sitting next to her favorite mug, every single morning, without fail. "Can't forget your vitamin, Jazz," Devon would say, usually without looking up from his laptop, already deep into his first meeting of the day or responding to overnight emails. It was said with such casual consistency that it had become background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator or the sound of traffic on Cherokee Avenue. Jasmine would take the pill, swallow it with her first sip of coffee, and think nothing of it. Why would she? This was her husband. This was the man who'd stood in the emergency room with her when she'd broken her ankle hiking, who'd driven 3 hours to attend her grandmother's funeral, even though he'd never met her, who'd spent an entire weekend assembling the complicated bookshelf she'd ordered online because she'd mentioned wanting more storage. This was the man who loved her, or so she'd believed. The first real crack in that belief had come on a Tuesday in late July. Jasmine had been getting ready for work, running late because she'd hit snooze one too many times, and she'd been rushing through her morning routine in a fog. She'd grabbed her coffee, started scrolling through her phone to check her email, and had completely forgotten about the vitamin sitting next to her mug. She'd been halfway to her car, travel mug in hand, when Devon had called out from the kitchen doorway. "Jazz, you forgot something." He'd been holding the pill, a slight edge to his voice that she'd never heard before. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Urgency, maybe, or anxiety. "Oh, right, thanks." She doubled back, taken the pill from his outstretched hand, dry swallowed it because she didn't want to go back inside for water, and rushed to her car. But the interaction had stuck with her throughout the day. Not because it was particularly dramatic, but because of that tone in his voice, that edge. Like it mattered, really mattered, that she'd almost left without taking it. She'd mentioned it to Kesha that Sunday over their standing brunch date. They were at Buttermilk Kitchen in Buckhead, splitting an order of chicken and waffles, when Jasmine had brought it up, almost as an afterthought. "It was weird, you know, like, it's just a vitamin. I can take it later." But he seemed genuinely stressed that I'd forgotten it. Kesha had looked at her over the rim of her mimosa, her expression carefully neutral.
How long have you been taking these vitamins? I don't know, 6 months, maybe a little longer? And you're still feeling tired all the time? Jasmine had paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. Sometimes. I mean, less than before, but yeah, sometimes. And the memory stuff? The forgetting things? Kesha, I'm a teacher. I have like 150 students. Of course I forget things sometimes. You forgot my birthday last month, Jazz. That had landed like a slap. Jasmine had opened her mouth to defend herself, then closed it. Because Kesha was right. She had forgotten. Her best friend of 12 years, the person who'd been her maid of honor at every wedding she'd been in.
Whose birthday was September 15th and had always been September 15th and always would be September 15th. She'd forgotten. She'd remembered 2 days later and had apologized profusely, and Kesha had been gracious about it, but still, she'd forgotten. You've been acting different, Kesha continued, her voice gentle now. Not just forgetful, distant. Like you're here but not really here, you know? I'll be talking to you and I can see you trying to focus, but it's like there's a lag or something. Like you're processing everything on a 5-second delay. Jasmine had wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't, because she'd felt it too. That lag. That sense of being slightly disconnected from her own life, watching it happen through foggy glass. She'd chalked it up to stress, to the demands of teaching, to getting older. But what if it wasn't any of those things? Maybe the vitamins aren't working, Kesha had suggested. Maybe you should try something else, or just stop taking them for a while, see if you feel different. Jasmine had nodded, agreed that yes, maybe she should talk to Devon about switching brands or taking a break. But when she'd gotten home that evening and had brought it up, casually, just mentioning that maybe the vitamins weren't doing what they were supposed to do, Devon's reaction had been immediate and intense. You need to keep taking them, he'd said, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it directed at her. Jazz, we talked about this. You were exhausted, running yourself into the ground. These are helping. I can see the difference. But I still feel tired sometimes, and Kesha said, Kesha isn't a doctor. She doesn't know what you need. There it was again, that edge, that something in his voice that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. But then he'd caught himself, softened his tone, reached out to take her hand. I'm sorry, I just worry about you. I see how hard you work, and I don't want you to burn out. These vitamins are good for you. Quality stuff. Just stick with them a little longer, okay? For me? And because he'd said it like that, with that concerned look in his eyes, with that gentle plea in his voice, she'd agreed. Of course she'd agreed. This was Devon, her partner, the man who only wanted what was best for her. The weeks that followed had been a slow creep into wrongness, small things, barely noticeable on their own, but accumulating like snow before an avalanche. Jasmine would wake up with no memory of going to bed. She'd find herself in the middle of tasks with no recollection of starting them. One afternoon, she'd realized she was standing in the laundry room, holding a bottle of detergent, with absolutely no idea why she was there or what she'd been planning to do. The bruises had started appearing around that time. Small ones at first, on her upper arms, the kind you might get from bumping into furniture or carrying heavy boxes. But Jasmine didn't remember bumping into anything. She'd asked Devon about them one night as they were getting ready for bed, lifting her arm to show him a purple-blue mark near her shoulder. Do you remember me hitting anything? Like, did I walk into something and just don't remember? He'd examined it with what seemed like genuine concern. I don't know, babe. You've been pretty out of it lately. Maybe you should make a doctor's appointment. Get checked out. Could be something serious. The way he'd said it, could be something serious, had scared her enough that she'd made an appointment the next day. Dr. Patel had run blood work, checked her blood pressure, asked about her stress levels and sleep patterns. Everything had come back normal. Probably just fatigue-related, she'd said. Bruising can happen when you're exhausted and not paying attention to your surroundings, but if it continues or gets worse, come back and we'll do more tests. Jasmine had told Devon about the appointment results, expecting him to be relieved. Instead, he'd seemed almost disappointed, or maybe frustrated. It had been hard to read his expression. "Normal blood work doesn't mean nothing's wrong," he'd said. "Maybe you need to see a specialist, a neurologist or something. The memory issues, the fatigue, Jazz, that's not normal for someone your age." He'd been so insistent that she'd started to wonder if maybe he was right. Maybe there was something wrong with her. Maybe she did need more tests, more doctors, more answers. The thought had terrified her, the possibility that at 34 years old she might be dealing with some kind of cognitive decline or neurological disorder. But then there'd been the incident with her phone. She'd been in the shower one morning when she'd heard her phone buzzing repeatedly in the bedroom. By the time she'd gotten out, wrapped in a towel and dripping water across the hardwood, Devon had been standing in their bedroom, her phone in his hand, a strange expression on his face. "Who's Marcus?" he'd asked. "What?" "Marcus. He's been texting you, a lot." Jasmine had felt her stomach drop, though she'd had no idea why. She didn't know anyone named Marcus. She'd taken the phone from Devon, scrolled through the messages. They were flirty, suggestive even, talking about meeting up, about how much fun they'd had last time, about when they could see each other again. I've never. I don't know who this is." Her hands had been shaking, the phone almost slipping from her wet fingers. "Devon, I swear to God I don't know who this person is." He'd believed her, or at least he'd seemed to. "Maybe someone got your number by mistake," he'd said. "Or it's some kind of scam. Block him." She'd blocked the number immediately, but the messages had haunted her for days. Had she somehow given her number to someone and forgotten? Had she had a conversation with this Marcus person while in one of her foggy states? The possibility made her feel sick. Looking back now, knowing what she knew about the notebook in Devon's drawer, about the pills that weren't vitamins, she realized the Marcus texts had probably been Devon. Setting up another reason for her to doubt herself. Planting evidence of her unreliability. Making her question her own mind, her own reality, her own trustworthiness. The night before she'd found the pills, Jasmine had woken up around 2 in the morning with an overwhelming urge to use the bathroom. She'd been groggy, disoriented, moving through the dark house on autopilot. On her way back to bed, she'd heard Devon's voice coming from his office. She'd paused in the hallway, confused. Who was he talking to at 2 in the morning? She'd crept closer to the door, which was closed, but not latched completely, leaving a sliver of light cutting across the hallway floor. Devon's voice had been low, but clear enough to make out words. "Should be out cold for at least another hour." "Yeah, the dosage is working." "No, she doesn't suspect anything." "I'm telling you, it's fine. She's completely—" Jasmine's heart had stopped. Completely stopped. She'd stood frozen in the hallway, her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. Out cold, dosage, doesn't suspect. She'd forced herself to move, to walk quietly back to the bedroom, to climb into bed and pull the covers up and close her eyes and pretend to be asleep. When Devon had slipped back into bed 15 minutes later, she'd kept her breathing steady and even, though her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could feel it. The next morning, she'd taken the vitamin Devon had left by her coffee mug. She'd held it in her palm for a long moment, looking at it, really looking at it, for the first time in months. Just a small white tablet, innocuous, helpful even according to Devon. Except it wasn't. She knew it wasn't, and as she'd raised it to her mouth, she'd made a choice. She'd pretended to swallow it, keeping it tucked against her cheek, and when Devon had turned back to his laptop, she'd spit it into her napkin and slipped it into her pocket. That afternoon, while Devon was on a video call and Jasmine was supposedly grading papers in the living room, she'd gone into their bathroom and examined the pill closely. It looked like a standard vitamin tablet. It even had the same brand stamping, but was it? How would she even know? She'd wrapped it carefully in tissue and hidden it in the zippered pocket of her purse, intending to... what? Take it to a pharmacist? Have it tested? She hadn't known yet. She'd just known she needed to keep it. Evidence. The next morning, she'd done the same thing, pretended to take the vitamin, palmed it, disposed of it later. And the morning after that. And the one after that. By the end of the week, something remarkable had happened. The fog had started to lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, like waking up from a long, strange dream. Colours seemed brighter, conversations easier to follow. Her memory sharpened, details snapping back into focus. She'd been drugged, for months, by her own husband, with her own unknowing consent. The realization should have sent her running, should have made her pack a bag and leave and never look back. But Jasmine was a teacher. She'd spent her entire adult life researching, analyzing, building cases with evidence. She couldn't just leave without knowing why, without understanding the full scope of what had been done to her, without having proof. So she'd started documenting. Notes on her phone, backed up to a cloud account Devon didn't know existed. Observations about her improving clarity. Details she was starting to remember from the foggy months. And she'd started watching Devon, really watching him, looking for the tells she'd missed before. They were everywhere once she knew to look for them. The way he monitored her coffee intake, always refilling her mug, encouraging her to drink more. The way he'd get tense when she suggested doing something spontaneous, something that wasn't part of their established routine. The way he'd subtly discourage her from seeing Kesha or other friends, always with concern for her well-being as the excuse. You've seemed so tired lately, Jazz. Maybe you should skip book club this month. Rest up. Kesha's going through a lot right now. Maybe she needs space. You don't want to overwhelm her. Another work happy hour? Didn't you just go to one last week? I worry about you overdoing it. Every suggestion designed to keep her isolated, to keep her home, to keep her under his control and observation. It had been exactly 1 week of not taking the pills, 1 week of slowly coming back to herself, when Devon had left his keys on the counter. When she'd found the drawer unlocked, when she'd discovered the baggie of pills and the notebook with its clinical observations and its horrifying documentation of her husband's systematic drugging of his own wife. Subject responding well, increased drowsiness, memory recall sluggish. She'd stood in that office holding evidence of a crime and realized she had a choice to make. She could leave right now, take the notebook, take the pills, go straight to the police, file a report, get a restraining order, blow up her marriage and her life and start over. Or she could stay, gather more evidence, find out exactly what Devon was doing and why, build an airtight case, protect herself fully, maybe protect the next woman too, because if Devon had done this to her, what would stop him from doing it to someone else? The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Jasmine was a teacher, but before that she was a survivor. And survivors don't run, they plan, they prepare. They make sure that when they strike it counts. She'd carefully put everything back exactly as she'd found it, checking and double-checking that the drawer looked undisturbed. She'd taken photos of every page of the notebook, of the pills, of the drawer's contents. She'd uploaded them to her secret cloud account. And then she'd gone to the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and waited for her husband to come home. When Devon had walked through the door that evening, Jasmine had been sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, looking for all the world like she'd had a normal, boring day. He kissed her on the forehead, asked about her day, started talking about what he wanted to order for dinner, and she'd smiled, she'd engaged, she'd pretended everything was fine, because now she knew the game they were playing, and she'd be damned if she was going to lose. The decision to keep pretending felt like swallowing glass, but Jasmine forced herself to do it anyway. Every morning she'd palm the vitamin Devon gave her, tuck it against her cheek, and dispose of it later. Every evening she'd smile and nod and ask about his day, and act like the loving, slightly scattered wife he expected her to be. All while her mind raced, sharp and clear for the first time in months, cataloguing every suspicious behavior, every controlling comment, every piece of evidence she could gather. She'd started keeping a physical journal too, hidden in the trunk of her car, inside a box of old teaching materials Devon would never think to look through. Every night after he'd fallen asleep, she'd sneak out to her car and document the day. Times, conversations, his reactions when she did or didn't do certain things. The pattern was becoming clearer with each entry. Devon's control extended far beyond the pills. She'd started testing it, subtly at first. She'd mention wanting to visit her sister in Savannah for the weekend, just to see what he'd say. "I don't know, Jazz. You've been so tired lately. Maybe a long drive isn't the best idea right now. Why don't we wait until you're feeling better?" She'd agree, noting his relief when she backed down. She'd suggest having Kesha over for dinner. "This week's pretty busy for me with work stuff. Maybe another time?" Always another time. Always a reason why not now. She'd proposed signing up for a pottery class she'd been eyeing at a studio in East Atlanta. "That's a lot of commitment when you're already so overwhelmed with school. Are you sure you can handle one more thing?" Framed as concern. Always framed as concern for her well-being. But underneath the concern was control. "Don't go anywhere. Don't commit to anything. Don't expand your world beyond this house, beyond me." The clarity brought rage, but Jasmine kept it buried deep. She'd learned in her years of teaching how to maintain a calm exterior, even when students were testing every limit. She applied those same skills now, smiling blandly while internally screaming. But the rage needed an outlet, and she found it in her car, driving to school in the morning, where she'd put on angry music and let herself feel everything she couldn't express at home. 2 weeks into her covert investigation, Jasmine made a crucial decision. She needed outside verification. She needed someone to know what was happening in case things went wrong. She couldn't tell Kesha. Kesha would insist she leave immediately, would probably physically drag her out of the house if necessary. She needed someone more measured, someone who could be objective. She'd chosen her department head, Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 50s who'd been teaching for 30 years and had seen everything. Jasmine had asked to meet her after school one Friday, claiming she needed advice on a personal matter. They'd sat in Patricia's classroom, afternoon sun slanting through the windows, and Jasmine had laid out everything. The vitamins that weren't vitamins, the documented drugging in Devon's notebook, the increasing control, the manipulation disguised as care. She'd shown Patricia the photos on her phone, watching the older woman's face shift from concern to horror to cold fury. "You need to leave," Patricia had said immediately. "Tonight, right now, we'll call the police together. This is a crime, Jasmine. Multiple crimes, actually." "I know. But I need more evidence. I need to understand why he's doing this. You need to be safe. That's all you need right now." "I am safe." He doesn't know I know. I'm in control of the situation. Patricia had given her a long, searching look. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're still living with a man who's been systematically drugging you for months. That doesn't sound like control to me. But Jasmine had been insistent, and eventually Patricia had agreed to be her safety net. They'd established a protocol. Jasmine would text Patricia every day with a specific emoji. A coffee cup meant everything was fine. A red heart meant she needed help but wasn't in immediate danger. A skull emoji meant call the police immediately. Patricia had saved the local precinct number in her phone, made Jasmine promise she'd reach out if things escalated, and agreed to keep her secret for now. Having Patricia in the loop gave Jasmine a strange sense of security, but it also made the situation more real. This wasn't just her paranoid imagination. This was serious enough that a responsible adult with decades of life experience thought it warranted police involvement. The weight of that settled on Jasmine's chest and stayed there. At home, Devon had started making comments about Jasmine seeming more energetic lately. The vitamins are really working, huh? You seem much more like yourself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She seemed more like herself because she'd stopped taking his pills. She'd just smiled and agreed. Yeah, I think they're really helping. He'd seemed pleased, validated even, and that's when Jasmine had noticed something that chilled her blood. He'd started increasing the dosage. Where before there'd been one pill by her coffee, now there were two. I did some more research, he'd explained. The recommended dosage is actually 2 tablets for maximum effectiveness. Can't believe I've had you on the wrong amount this whole time. 2 pills meant twice as much to dispose of without him noticing. It meant twice the risk of him catching her. She'd had a close call one morning when she'd palmed the pills, but then Devon had turned back around unexpectedly, catching her with her hand near her mouth in what probably looked like she'd just taken them. Her heart had nearly stopped, but he'd just smiled, asked if she wanted more coffee, and walked away. The near miss had rattled her. She'd started varying her disposal method, sometimes in a napkin, sometimes in the pocket of her cardigan, once even dropping them in her travel mug when Devon wasn't looking and fishing them out later in her car. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, this performance of normalcy. She'd also started paying attention to Devon's schedule, noting when he left the house and for how long. He worked from home most days, but occasionally he'd have in-person meetings with clients or vendors. Those were her opportunities. She'd use those precious hours to search the house more thoroughly, looking for additional evidence, trying to piece together the full picture. In his office, hidden behind a stack of technical manuals on a high shelf, she'd found another notebook. This one was older, dating back to before they'd even met. Pages and pages of notes about women, their habits, their routines, their vulnerabilities. Some entries were clinical observations like the ones about her. Others were more strategic, how to approach them, what to say, how to gain trust. It read like a predator's playbook. One entry in particular had made her stomach turn. It was about a woman named Alicia, dated 3 years ago. Subject A proving more difficult than anticipated. Resistance to routine establishment. May need to discontinue project. Discontinue project. Like the woman was an experiment that hadn't yielded the desired results. Jasmine had photographed every page. Her hands shaking so badly, she'd had to take several shots of each one to ensure at least one was readable. She'd wanted to vomit. She'd wanted to scream. Instead, she'd carefully put the notebook back exactly where she'd found it, climbed down from the step stool, and gone to the bathroom to splash cold water on her face until the nausea passed. That weekend, Devon had suggested they have dinner with some of his work friends, something they rarely did. Jasmine had agreed, curious about what he'd be like in a social setting now that she was seeing him clearly. They'd gone to a nice restaurant in Midtown, met up with two other couples. Devon had been charming, attentive, but not overbearing. He'd told funny stories, asked thoughtful questions, played the role of devoted husband perfectly. But Jasmine had noticed something. Every time she'd tried to contribute to the conversation, Devon would subtly redirect. If she started telling a story, he'd interrupt with a correction to a detail that didn't need correcting. If someone asked her a question directly, he'd often answer for her or add his own commentary before she'd finish speaking. It was smooth, almost imperceptible, but the effect was clear. He was managing her narrative, controlling what version of her these people saw. On the drive home, she'd mentioned it as casually as she could manage. "You kind of talked over me a few times tonight." "Did I? I'm sorry, babe. I didn't realize. You just seemed a little off, so I was trying to help." A little off. Because she'd been trying to present herself as normal, as competent, as the person she actually was when she wasn't being drugged. And to him, that version of her was off because it didn't match the docile, scattered woman he'd been engineering for months. The conversation had continued, Devon apologizing profusely, Jasmine accepting his apology while mentally adding it to her growing dossier of evidence. Not evidence that would hold up in court necessarily, but evidence that confirmed what she already knew. Every aspect of their relationship was about his control. She'd started wondering about their finances. Devon handled all the bills, something she'd been grateful for initially, because she hated dealing with that kind of administrative work. But now she wondered what else he'd been handling, without her knowledge or input. One afternoon, while Devon was in a video meeting, she'd logged into their joint bank account for the first time in months. The balance was lower than she'd expected, significantly lower. There were regular transfers to an account she didn't recognize, sometimes $300, sometimes $500, once even $1,000. Always round numbers, always on the same days of the month. She'd taken screenshots, logged out, and spent the rest of the day trying to figure out where that money was going. That night, she'd carefully broached the subject over dinner. "Hey, I was looking at our account today and noticed some transfers to an account ending in 7840. Devon's expression had flickered, just for a second, but she'd caught it. Surprise, annoyance maybe. Then the smooth mask had slid back into place. "Oh, that. Yeah, I set up a separate savings account for emergencies. I should have told you, but I wanted to surprise you with how much we'd saved." "How much have we saved?" "Almost 10,000 at this point. Not bad, right?" Except the transfers she'd seen totaled closer to 15,000, which meant either Devon couldn't do math, unlikely for a software engineer, or he was lying about the amount. She'd smiled, told him that was great, thanked him for being so responsible with their money. Inside, she'd added financial manipulation to the list of his offenses. The next day, she'd created her own secret savings account and started siphoning money from her paychecks before they hit the joint account. Small amounts that wouldn't be noticed, $50 here, $100 there. She'd needed her own resources, her own escape fund, something Devon couldn't touch or monitor. 3 weeks into not taking the pills, Jasmine had felt like a different person. The brain fog was completely gone. Her memory was sharp. Her energy levels had stabilized. She'd even lost the weird anxiety she'd developed over the past months, that constant low-level panic that she'd attributed to work stress, but now recognized as a side effect of whatever Devon had been giving her. Her students had noticed the change. "Ms. Williams, you seem really happy lately," one of her juniors had commented after class. "Like, happier than you've been all year." The observation had nearly made her cry, because she was happy, or at least she was herself again, which felt close to happiness when you'd been living in a fog for so long. She'd thanked the student, made some comment about having a good week, and then gone to her car during lunch and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what had been stolen from her. Months of her life, months of her mind, months of her autonomy. And then she'd dried her eyes, fixed her makeup, and gone back to class, because there was still work to do, still evidence to gather, still a case to build. That evening she'd heard Devon on another late-night phone call. She'd been careful this time, staying far enough from the office door that he wouldn't hear her breathing, using the baby monitor they'd bought months ago when they'd been half-heartedly discussing whether they wanted kids. She'd placed the parent unit in the hallway, retrieved the monitor unit, and taken it back to the bedroom where she could listen. Dosage increase seems to be working. More compliant overall. Memory issues persist, which is ideal. Next phase should be implementing the financial restructuring. Yes, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her at this point. Trust me, she doesn't question anything. Jasmine had lain in bed, listening to her husband discuss her like she was a project, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be managed. The casual cruelty of it, not even cruelty really, because cruelty implied some emotional investment. This was worse. This was clinical, detached, like she was just a variable in whatever sick equation he was running. The next phase, financial restructuring. What did that mean? Was he planning to drain their accounts? Take out loans in her name? Transfer assets? The possibilities spiraled through her mind, each more horrifying than the last. She'd needed to know what the next phase was, needed to know what Devon was planning. And more than that, she'd needed to know why. What was the end game here? What did he get out of this beyond control? Because while the controls seemed to feed something in him, there had to be more. People didn't commit this level of premeditated abuse without a concrete goal. The answer had come the following week, and it was worse than anything Jasmine could have imagined. She'd been home sick from work, actually sick this time, just a bad cold, when she'd heard Devon in his office on a video call. The door had been slightly ajar, and she'd heard a woman's voice coming through his speakers. Curious, still foggy from cold medicine, but alert enough to know something was off, she'd crept down the hallway. "So the policy is in place?" the woman had been asking. "Life insurance, right? 2 million? "Yeah, it's all set up. She signed everything last month, though she probably doesn't remember doing it." Jasmine's blood had run cold. Life insurance, $2 million. She'd had no memory of signing any life insurance policy, which meant Devon had done it while she was drugged, while she'd been in that compliant, suggestible state he'd been engineering for months. "And the beneficiary?" the woman asked. "All me, obviously. She doesn't have any other family that matters. Parents are dead, sisters estranged. I'm all she's got." The casual way he'd said it, all she's got, while plotting what sounded an awful lot like her murder. Because that's what this was, wasn't it? The end game. Get her addicted to or dependent on the pills. Increase the dosage. Make her seem unstable, forgetful, possibly mentally ill. Take out a massive life insurance policy. And then, what? An accidental overdose? A tragic fall down the stairs? A car accident caused by her medical issues? Jasmine had backed away from the door, slowly, carefully, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run, to get out, to go anywhere but here. She'd made it to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor with her head between her knees, trying to breathe through the panic. He was going to kill her. Her husband, the man she'd loved, the man she'd built a life with, was systematically planning her death for $2 million in insurance money. She'd pulled out her phone with shaking hands, and texted Patricia, red heart emoji. Then she'd added, life insurance policy, 2 million. Didn't sign it, but he says I did. Need help. Patricia's response had been immediate. Where are you right now? Are you safe? Home. He doesn't know I heard. Playing sick. Can you leave? Not yet. Need more proof. Need recording of him admitting it. Jasmine, this is beyond what we discussed. You need to call the police. Now. But Jasmine hadn't called the police. Instead, she'd stayed on that bathroom floor for 20 minutes, forcing herself to think clearly, to plan. Because if she went to the police now with what she had, photos of notebooks, a story about being drugged, an overheard conversation about life insurance, what would that get her? Devon was smart. He'd have explanations. The vitamins were just vitamins. She was being paranoid because of work stress. The notebooks were research for a novel he was writing. The life insurance was his idea to protect their future. The conversation she'd overheard was taken out of context. She'd needed irrefutable proof, a confession, ideally recorded, evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. She'd needed Devon to incriminate himself so thoroughly that there'd be no possibility of talking his way out. So she'd wiped her eyes, blown her nose, and emerged from the bathroom looking appropriately miserable from her cold. She'd shuffled back to the bedroom, climbed under the covers, and when Devon had checked on her an hour later, she'd smiled weakly and accepted the cup of tea he'd brought her. Feeling any better? He'd asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, radiating false concern. A little. Thank you for taking care of me. Always, Jazz. That's what I'm here for. To take care of her, to make sure she was docile and compliant, and too fog-brained to realize what was happening to her, to fatten the lamb before the slaughter. She'd needed to make him think she was getting worse, not better. Needed to make him believe his plan was working so he'd get confident, maybe careless. So she'd started pretending to take the pills again, or rather, pretending to pretend. She'd palm them like always, but then she'd act more scattered, more forgetful. She'd leave tasks half-finished. She'd ask him the same question multiple times in an evening. She'd seem confused about basic things like what day it was, or what they'd eaten for dinner. Devon had eaten it up. She'd seen the satisfaction in his eyes every time she'd acted confused, every time she'd needed his help with something simple. This was what he wanted, her completely dependent, completely under his control, completely vulnerable. And while he was basking in his perceived success, Jasmine had been buying hidden cameras online, tiny ones, the kind marketed for home security or nanny monitoring. She'd placed one in a fake plant on the bookshelf in his office, positioned to capture both his desk and the doorway. She'd placed another in the living room, disguised as a phone charger. She'd put one in the bedroom, hidden in the alarm clock on her nightstand. Everything was backed up to a cloud account Devon knew nothing about. Every conversation, every phone call he thought was private, every moment he let his mask slip. All of it documented, all of it saved. She'd also started documenting her own lucidity. Every morning she'd record a video on her phone, date, time, confirmation that she was clear-headed and not taking the pills Devon gave her. She'd explain what she was doing and why. She'd created a paper trail of her own competence and awareness, something that would counter any narrative Devon might try to spin about her being mentally unstable. 2 days after overhearing the life insurance conversation, Jasmine had received a call from her sister Nicole in Savannah. They hadn't spoken in over a year, a rift that had happened before Devon, something about Nicole's drinking problem and Jasmine's inability to watch her self-destruct. But Nicole had been trying to make amends, was 6 months sober, wanted to rebuild their relationship. Jasmine had told Devon about the call, testing him. Nicole wants me to come visit for a weekend. She's doing better, going to AA, working a program. She'd watched his face carefully, seen the calculation behind his eyes. That's great, Jazz. I'm proud of her. But are you sure you're up for that right now? You've been pretty out of it lately. Long drive, emotional situation with your sister. That's a lot to handle. Maybe you're right. I'll tell her not yet. I think that's smart. Give it some time. You can visit when you're feeling stronger. When you're feeling stronger. Translation. When you're more drugged, more compliant, less likely to tell your sister anything concerning. Or maybe never, if Devon's plan reached its conclusion before then. That night, Jasmine had called Nicole back from her car, parked in the lot of a 24-hour CVS, 3 miles from home. I need you to know something, she'd said. And I need you to not freak out. Can you do that? Nicole had agreed, though her voice had been tight with worry. Jasmine had laid out the basics, not everything, because there hadn't been time, but enough. The drugging, the control, the life insurance policy, the feeling that Devon was building towards something terrible. Get out, Nicole had said immediately. Right now. Don't go back to that house. I'll drive up tonight. We'll get your stuff. I can't. Not yet. I need evidence that'll stick. I need him to bury himself so deep there's no way out. Jasmine, you're talking about someone who's planning to kill you. Evidence doesn't matter if you're dead. I'm not going to die. I'm in control of this situation. Are you? Because it sounds to me like you're playing a very dangerous game with someone who's already proven he's willing to destroy you. The words had hit harder than Jasmine wanted to admit, but she'd held firm. I need 2 more weeks, maybe 3. I'm recording everything.
I've got cameras set up. I'm building a case that'll put him away for years. Just be ready. If something happens, if I send you a specific message, I need you to go to the police with everything I'm about to send you. She'd emailed Nicole all the photos, all the documentation, all the videos she'd recorded of herself explaining the situation.
She'd made her sister promise to check her email every single day to watch for any message that seemed off, or urgent, or coded. What kind of coded message? Nicole had asked. If I email you anything about medication side effects or scheduling a doctor's appointment, that means something's wrong and you need to call 911 immediately, give them my address, tell them there's an emergency. Nicole had been crying by then. I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe he... I know, but it is happening. And I need to handle it smart, okay? I need you to trust me. I trust you, but please, please be careful. Jasmine had promised she would be, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself anymore, because careful meant maintaining the charade. Careful meant continuing to live with a man who was planning her death. Careful meant pretending everything was normal while her whole world balanced on a knife's edge. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Jasmine's life. Every morning, the same routine. Accept the pills from Devon, palm them, dispose of them later. Every day, act progressively more scattered and confused. Every night, review the footage from the hidden cameras, looking for anything damning enough to take to the police. And then, 3 weeks after she'd found the original notebook, the break she'd been waiting for finally came. Devon's business partner called, a man named James that Jasmine had met exactly twice. He needed Devon to come into the office downtown, some emergency with a server that couldn't be handled remotely. Devon had been agitated, reluctant to leave. How long will you be gone? Jasmine had asked, making her voice small and dependent. Few hours, probably. Will you be okay here by yourself? I think so. I'll just watch TV or something. Okay, take it easy. Don't try to do too much. The second his car had pulled out of the driveway, Jasmine had sprung into action. She'd gone straight to his office, pulled down both notebooks and photographed every single page again, this time with her hand in each shot to prove they were real and current. She'd opened his laptop, password was her birthday, the irony wasn't lost on her, and found folders of documents, life insurance policies, medical records he'd somehow obtained, emails to the insurance company discussing her deteriorating mental state, the communications with someone named Dr. Brennan about having her evaluated for early onset dementia, everything carefully constructed to paint a picture of a loving husband trying to care for his increasingly unstable wife. There was even a draft email to her principal, expressing concern about her ability to teach, suggesting she might need to take medical leave. He'd been planning to systematically dismantle her professional life, isolate her completely, make her totally dependent on him before whatever the final step was. Jasmine had copied everything to a flash drive, uploaded it all to her cloud storage, photographed the screen showing the files. She'd been methodical, thorough, making sure she didn't miss anything. And then she'd found the final piece of the puzzle. A folder labeled Project Management. Inside were detailed timelines, strategies, contingencies, and at the very end, a document titled Final Phase Implementation. She'd opened it with trembling hands. The plan was laid out with horrifying clarity. Increased dosage gradually over the next month. Arrange for a psychiatrist evaluation that would recommend inpatient treatment. Get her committed, willingly if possible, but involuntarily if necessary. While she was institutionalized and unable to advocate for herself, transfer all assets into his name. Then, once everything was secured, facilitate an accidental overdose during one of her home visits from the institution. The insurance payout, the assets, everything would be his. And he'd be the grieving widower, the devoted husband who'd tried so hard to save his mentally ill wife. Jasmine had sat in Devon's desk chair reading her own murder plan, feeling strangely detached from her body. This was real. This was actually happening. This wasn't paranoia or imagination or stress-induced delusion. This was a comprehensive, detailed plan to destroy her life and then end it. She'd photographed every page of that document. She'd copied it to 3 separate flash drives. She'd emailed it to herself, to Nicole, to Patricia, to a burner email account she'd created specifically for this situation. She'd made sure that even if something happened to her, even if Devon somehow succeeded in his plan, there would be a trail. There would be evidence. There would be justice. Then she'd carefully put everything back exactly as she'd found it, shut down the laptop, and gone to the kitchen. She'd made herself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and she'd sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, trying to process what she'd just learned. When Devon had come home 4 hours later, he'd found her in the same spot, the tea long gone cold. "Hey, you okay? You look pale." She'd smiled weakly. "Just tired. Didn't do much today. Just kind of existed." He'd kissed the top of her head, seemingly satisfied with her deterioration. "That's okay. You need to rest. Let me take care of you. Let me take care of you. Let me drug you and manipulate you and steal from you and eventually kill you, all while pretending it's for your own good." That night, Jasmine had lain awake long after Devon had fallen asleep beside her. Tomorrow, she'd decided she would go to the police. She had enough evidence. More than enough. She had documentation, recordings, the actual plan written in his own words. She had proof of the drugging, proof of the financial manipulation, proof of his intent to have her institutionalized and eventually killed. Tomorrow she would end this. Tomorrow she would take back her life. Tomorrow, Devon Williams would find out what happened when you underestimated a high school English teacher who'd spent her whole career teaching students how to build airtight arguments with evidence, and logic. But tonight she would lie here, in this bed, next to the man who'd vowed to love and cherish her, who'd promised to protect her, who'd looked her in the eyes and lied every single day for months. She would lie here and breathe quietly and pretend to sleep and count down the hours until dawn. The game was almost over, and Devon had no idea he'd already lost. The drive to the police station felt surreal. Jasmine had called in sick to work, claiming a stomach bug, and had left the house at her usual time as if heading to school. Devon had been on a morning call, had barely looked up when she'd said goodbye. She'd walked to her car with her purse over her shoulder, her laptop bag in her hand, everything looking completely normal from the outside. Except nothing was normal. Inside her laptop bag, alongside her school materials, were 3 flash drives containing every piece of evidence she'd gathered. In her purse was a folder with printed copies of the most damning documents, the life insurance policy she didn't remember signing, pages from Devon's notebooks, screenshots of the final phase implementation document. She'd worn a blazer and dress pants instead of her usual teaching clothes, wanting to look credible, put together, not like someone who'd been systematically drugged for months. The Atlanta Police Department's Zone 3 precinct was in southeast Atlanta, a squat brick building that looked like every other municipal building, institutional and vaguely depressing. Jasmine had parked in the visitor lot, sat in her car for 5 full minutes, trying to steady her breathing, and then walked inside. The officer at the front desk had been a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Can I help you?" "I need to report. I'm not sure what to call it. Domestic abuse, I guess, but it's complicated. My husband has been drugging me without my knowledge for months, and I have evidence that he's planning to kill me for life insurance money." The words had sounded insane even as Jasmine said them, like something from a true crime podcast, not her actual life. But the officer's expression had shifted immediately from polite interest to sharp attention. "Okay, let me get you with a detective. Have a seat." Jasmine had sat in the waiting area, watching officers come and go, listening to phone calls and radio chatter, feeling completely surreal. This was happening. She was actually doing this. There was no going back now. Detective Sarah Chen had been younger than Jasmine expected, maybe early 30s, with her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and dark circles under her eyes that suggested long hours and too much caffeine. She'd introduced herself, led Jasmine to a small interview room, and listened without interrupting as Jasmine had laid out the entire story from beginning to end. She'd started with meeting Devon, establishing the relationship, showing how normal everything had seemed. Then the vitamins, the increasing fatigue and memory problems, the doctor's appointment where everything came back normal, the suspicious behavior she'd noticed once she'd stopped taking the pills, finding the drawer, the notebooks, the phone conversation she'd overheard, the life insurance policy, the final plan she'd found on his computer. Detective Chen had taken notes, asked clarifying questions, requested to see the evidence. Jasmine had pulled out the flash drives, the printed documents, had pulled up the cloud storage on her phone, showing the videos she'd recorded of herself documenting her lucidity and explaining the situation. "These hidden cameras you mentioned, they're still recording?" "Yes, everything's backed up to cloud storage in real time. I have footage of him discussing my deterioration on phone calls, of him monitoring whether I take the pills, of him documenting my behavior in his notebook. It's all there." Detective Chen had reviewed the final phase implementation document carefully, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is detailed, extremely detailed." She'd looked up at Jasmine. "You understand that what you're describing is attempted murder, right? Multiple felonies. Drugging someone without consent, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. This is serious. I know, that's why I'm here. Why didn't you come sooner? Why wait until you had all this evidence? Jasmine had expected this question. Because I'm a teacher, I've spent years teaching students how to build arguments, how to present evidence that can't be disputed or explained away. I know how smart Devon is. I know how charming he can be. If I'd come to you 3 weeks ago with just a suspicion and some photos of a notebook, what would you have been able to do? He would have had explanations for everything, but this... She gestured to the stack of evidence. This is irrefutable. Detective Chen had nodded slowly. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to bring in my sergeant, and we're going to go through all of this evidence methodically. We'll need you to make a formal statement. We'll need to test those pills you've been saving. We'll need to verify the authenticity of these documents. And then, if everything checks out the way I think it will, we'll be getting a warrant for your husband's arrest. How long will that take? The statement and evidence review. Probably a few hours. The warrant we can expedite given the severity and the threat to your life. We could have officers at your house as early as this evening, but, and this is important, you cannot go back there. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay? My sister, in Savannah. I'd recommend you go there tonight, or we can arrange for a hotel if that's not possible. Once we arrest your husband, there'll be a bail hearing, and depending on how that goes, he might be released pending trial. You need to be somewhere he can't find you. The reality of it was crashing over Jasmine in waves. This was really happening. Devon was going to be arrested, charged. There would be a trial. Her life was about to be dissected in court, in the news, in front of everyone she knew. What about my job, my students? I can't just disappear. We'll work with you on that, but your safety comes first. Your husband has detailed plans to kill you. That's not hyperbole or paranoia. It's documented fact. You need to take this seriously. Jasmine had spent the next 4 hours in that interview room, going through every piece of evidence with Detective Chen and her sergeant, making a formal statement, answering questions, signing paperwork. They'd sent the pills she'd saved to the lab for testing. They'd verified the documents against public records. They'd watched segments of the video footage from her hidden cameras. Around 2 in the afternoon, Detective Chen had left the room and come back with an update. We've got enough for the warrant. Judge signed off on it 20 minutes ago. We're going to execute it at your home at 5 p.m. I need you to not be there. Is there anything you need from the house? Anything critical? Jasmine had thought about it. Her laptop, but she had it with her. Her important documents, passport, birth certificate, social security card, those were in a fireproof safe in the bedroom closet. Her clothes, her books, her life, all still at the house she could no longer return to. My cat, she'd said suddenly. We have a cat, Milo, I can't leave him there. Detective Chen had nodded. We can arrange for animal control to pick him up during the arrest. He'll be held temporarily, and you can collect him once we've processed the scene. Anything else? The safe in our bedroom closet, it has my documents. The code is 0915, my birthday. We'll secure that for you. I know this is overwhelming, but you're doing the right thing. You're keeping yourself safe, and you're making sure your husband can't do this to anyone else. Anyone else? The thought had made Jasmine's stomach turn. That notebook with entries about other women, had there been others before her? Had Devon done this before, and either they hadn't survived or hadn't reported it? Or had he been building up to this, and she was the first full implementation of his sick plan? She'd left the police station around 3 p.m. with a folder full of victim resources, a reference number for her case, and Detective Chen's direct phone number. Call me if anything happens, if you think of anything else, if you need anything at all, the detective had said. And Jasmine, you're incredibly brave. Most people in your situation wouldn't have had the presence of mind to gather evidence like this. You probably saved your own life. Jasmine had driven to a Target parking lot and sat in her car, trying to process everything. In 2 hours, police would be at her house. They'd arrest Devon. They'd seize his computers, his notebooks, all the evidence. By tonight, everyone would know. Her colleagues, her students' parents, her friends. The whole story would come out, and her private hell would become public record. She'd called Nicole, told her what was happening, asked if the offer to stay in Savannah was still open. Nicole had been crying, had said yes immediately, had told Jasmine to drive there right now, and she'd have the guest room ready. "I'm so proud of you," Nicole had said. "And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Jasmine had called Patricia next. Given her the basics, she'd gone to the police. Devon would be arrested today. She'd be taking a leave of absence from work effective immediately. Patricia had been shaken but supportive, had promised to handle everything with the administration, had told Jasmine not to worry about anything except taking care of herself. She'd called Kesha last. That conversation had been harder. Kesha had known something was wrong for months, but hadn't known how wrong. Hearing the full story, the drugging, the manipulation, the planned murder, had broken something in her best friend's voice. "I should have pushed harder," Kesha had said. "I should have made you leave when I first noticed something was off. You couldn't have known. I didn't even know. But I should have trusted my gut.
I should have... Kesha, listen to me. You did everything you could. You noticed. You asked questions. You expressed concern. That's what helped me realize something was wrong. Don't blame yourself for what Devon did." By 4:30, Jasmine was on I-75 South, heading towards Savannah, her car packed with the few things she'd grabbed from her classroom and her trunk.
She'd turned off her location services, blocked Devon's number, changed all her passwords to accounts he might have access to. She was cutting every tie, severing every connection. At 5:15, while she was somewhere south of Macon, Detective Chen had called. "We've arrested him. He's in custody. Thought you'd want to know." Jasmine had pulled over to the side of the highway, her hands shaking too badly to drive safely. "What happened? What did he say?" "He was cooperative at first, seemed confused about why we were there. Then we showed him the warrant, and his whole demeanor changed, got very quiet. Asked for a lawyer immediately, which is his right. We seized his computers, his notebooks, everything we discussed. The evidence is solid, Jasmine."
He's not getting out of this. Is he? Did he say anything about me? Just that you'd been unstable lately, that he was worried about your mental health, that you'd probably made this whole thing up. Exactly what we expected. But his explanations don't hold up against the evidence. The prosecutors are already building the case. You did good. After hanging up,
Jasmine had sat on the shoulder of the highway for 20 minutes, watching traffic rush past, feeling nothing and everything simultaneously. Relief, terror, grief, rage, vindication, all of it swirling together in a mess she couldn't untangle. Her husband was in jail. The man she'd loved, the man she'd planned a future with, was being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Her marriage was over. Her home wasn't hers anymore. Her life as she'd known it was completely destroyed. But she was alive. She was clear-headed. She was safe. And she'd done it herself. She'd saved her own life through careful planning and documentation and sheer stubborn refusal to be a victim. She'd pulled back onto the highway and continued south toward Savannah, toward her sister's guest room, toward whatever came next. The sun was setting behind her, painting the Georgia sky in shades of orange and pink, and Jasmine had allowed herself one small moment of gratitude. She'd survived. Despite everything Devon had done, despite months of being drugged and manipulated and systematically dismantled, she'd survived. She'd fought back. She'd won. The war wasn't over. There would be a trial, probably a long one. There would be questions and publicity and trauma to process. But the immediate battle was finished. Devon had lost, and Jasmine was still standing. That's all that mattered right now. She was still standing. The weeks following Devon's arrest blurred together in a haze of legal consultations, therapy sessions, and endless cups of tea in Nicole's sunny Savannah kitchen. The local news in Atlanta had picked up the story. Software engineer arrested for attempted murder of wife. And for a few days, Jasmine's face had been plastered across television screens and newspaper websites. She'd stopped reading the articles after the first few. The comment sections were toxic, full of people questioning whether she was telling the truth, speculating about her mental state, dissecting her marriage in the most invasive ways possible. But there were others too. Women who'd reached out through her lawyer, through Patricia, even through old social media accounts Jasmine had forgotten existed. Women sharing their own stories of being drugged, controlled, manipulated by partners. Women thanking her for speaking up, for gathering evidence, for showing that it was possible to fight back. Detective Chen had called regularly with updates. The lab results on the pills had come back. They contained a cocktail of benzodiazepines and sleep aids, enough to cause significant cognitive impairment, but not so much as to raise immediate medical concerns. Clever. Devon had been careful to keep her functional enough that people wouldn't notice anything seriously wrong, just tired and scattered enough to be controllable. The life insurance policy had been verified. $2 million with Devon as the sole beneficiary. Jasmine's signature was on the documents, but handwriting analysis suggested it had been forged. Or, more likely, Devon had guided her hand while she was heavily sedated. The insurance company was cooperating with investigators, horrified that their policy had been part of an attempted murder scheme. Devon's computers had yielded even more evidence. Deleted emails discussing dosages with someone who appeared to be advising him, possibly the mysterious person he'd been talking to on those late-night phone calls. Research into untraceable poisons. Queries about how long cognitive impairment persisted after drug cessation. A spreadsheet tracking Jasmine's behavior, changes over months, noting which dosages produced the most compliant responses. The notebooks had been authenticated. The entries about previous women, there had been 3 before Jasmine, though none had been taken as far. One had broken up with Devon early in the relationship. One had moved away for work. One had simply ghosted him, and reading between the lines of his notes, Jasmine suspected that woman had sensed something wrong and escaped before Devon could implement his full plan. Devon's bail hearing had been a nightmare. His lawyer had argued that he was a respected professional with no criminal record, that he posed no flight risk, that the allegations were based on a mentally unstable woman's paranoid delusions. The prosecution had countered with the mountain of evidence, the detailed murder plan, the forged life insurance documents. The judge had denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the clear danger Devon posed. He'd remain in custody pending trial. Jasmine had watched the hearing via video link from Nicole's house, her sister sitting beside her on the couch, both of them staring at the laptop screen. Seeing Devon in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller somehow without his usual confident bearing, had been surreal. He'd glanced at the camera once, and Jasmine had wondered if he knew she was watching. His expression had been unreadable, not angry or scared or remorseful, just blank. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out. The prosecution was building their case methodically, interviewing the previous women Devon had dated, examining his financial records, consulting with medical experts about the drugs he'd used. Jasmine's lawyer had explained that the case was strong, maybe the strongest attempted murder case she'd seen in her 15 years of practice. The documentation Jasmine had gathered, the video evidence, Devon's own written plans. It was prosecutorial gold. But that didn't mean it would be easy. Devon's defense team was reportedly planning to argue that Jasmine had fabricated the evidence, that she'd planted the notebooks and drugged herself to frame him, that the whole thing was an elaborate scheme to escape a marriage she regretted. It was absurd, easily disprovable, but they'd try anyway. And Jasmine would have to sit in a courtroom and listen to lawyers argue that she'd done this to herself. Therapy had been necessary? Nicole had found her a therapist in Savannah who specialized in trauma and domestic abuse. Dr. Williams, a different Williams, thankfully, had been gentle but direct, helping Jasmine process the layers of betrayal and violation, the lost months of her life, the way Devon had stolen her autonomy, her memories, her sense of reality, the fact that she'd loved someone who'd been planning to kill her. "It's okay to grieve the relationship you thought you had," Dr. Williams had said during one session. "Even though it was built on lies and manipulation, your feelings were real. Your love was real. That loss deserves to be mourned." Jasmine had cried a lot in those first weeks. For the marriage that had never actually existed, for the future she'd imagined, for the version of Devon she'd fallen in love with who'd maybe never been real at all, for the months of her life that had been stolen that she could never get back. But she'd also felt anger. Pure, clarifying rage at what had been done to her, at the calculated cruelty of it, at Devon's arrogance in thinking he could get away with it. That anger had been useful. It had fueled her through the harder days, reminded her that she had every right to pursue justice. Patricia had been incredible throughout everything. She'd arranged for a long-term substitute to take over Jasmine's classes, had made sure Jasmine's health insurance continued, had even organized a fundraiser among the teaching staff to help with legal expenses. The outpouring of support from her colleagues had been overwhelming. Cards, emails, even a few home-cooked meals delivered to Nicole's house by teachers willing to make the 4-hour drive. Kesha had visited twice, staying for long weekends, bringing Jasmine's favorite foods and terrible reality TV and a willingness to just sit in silence when words felt like too much. "I should have known," she kept saying, until Jasmine finally snapped at her. "Stop! You couldn't have known. I didn't know, and I was living it. Devon was meticulous. He planned every detail. The only reason I figured it out was because I accidentally stopped taking the pills and my brain cleared enough to recognize what was happening. That's not on you. That's on him." Milo, the cat, had been returned to Jasmine after a week in temporary custody. He'd seemed confused by the new environment, had spent the first few days hiding under Nicole's guest bed, but gradually he'd emerged and reclaimed his role as Jasmine's shadow. Having him curl up beside her at night, purring steadily, had been more comforting than Jasmine wanted to admit. 3 months after Devon's arrest, Jasmine had finally felt steady enough to start thinking about the future. Not the distant future that still felt too overwhelming, but the immediate next steps. She couldn't go back to Atlanta. Too many memories, too much publicity, too many places that would remind her of Devon and what he'd done. But she couldn't hide in Savannah forever either. Nicole had suggested she stay, find a teaching position at one of the local schools, build a new life close to family. It was tempting, but Jasmine had spent her entire adult life in Atlanta. Her career was there, her friends, her whole professional identity. Giving that up felt like letting Devon win, like allowing him to take even more from her than he already had. So she'd compromised. She'd take the rest of the academic year off, stay in Savannah through the trial, focus on healing. Then, depending on how everything shook out, she'd decide. Maybe return to Atlanta, maybe stay in Savannah, maybe move somewhere completely new and start fresh. The prosecution had asked if she'd be willing to give a victim impact statement at sentencing, assuming Devon was convicted. Jasmine had said yes without hesitation. She wanted him to hear directly from her exactly what he'd done. Not just the crimes he'd be convicted of, but the human cost, the terror, the violation, the months of her life he'd stolen. 4 months post-arrest, Jasmine had finally felt brave enough to watch the video footage from her hidden cameras. All of it. Hours and hours of Devon discussing her like an experiment, monitoring her behavior, adjusting his strategy. It had been brutal, but it had also been validating. Every manipulation she'd suspected, every controlling behavior she'd questioned, it was all there, documented in Devon's own words and actions. There was one clip that had particularly gutted her. Devon on the phone with someone, about 2 months before Jasmine had discovered the truth. "I almost feel bad sometimes," he'd said. "She's so trusting, so sweet. She really thinks I'm taking care of her. But then I think about the payout and remember that sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. That's what her life had been worth to him. $2 million and the thrill of pulling off the perfect crime." 5 months out, the defense had tried to get some of Jasmine's evidence thrown out, arguing that the hidden cameras violated Devon's right to privacy in his own home. The judge had disagreed, ruling that Jasmine had every right to record in shared spaces of the home she lived in, especially given the circumstances. Another victory for the prosecution. Devon's former business partner, James, had been interviewed by investigators. He'd been shocked by the allegations, claimed he'd had no idea what Devon was doing in his personal life. But he'd confirmed that Devon had been stressed about money recently, that a client contract had fallen through, that Devon had mentioned needing a big influx of cash to keep his business afloat. Motive established. The jury selection for the trial was set to begin in 3 weeks. Jasmine had met with the prosecution team to prepare for her testimony. They'd walked her through what to expect, how the defense might try to rattle her, how to stay calm and factual on the stand. "You're our star witness," the lead prosecutor had said, "but you're also the victim. Don't try to be anything other than truthful. Tell your story. The evidence backs you up." Now, 6 months after that terrible morning when she'd found the pills in Devon's drawer, Jasmine sat on Nicole's back porch, watching the Savannah sun set over the marsh, trying to process where her life had ended up. She was 34 years old, separated, soon to be divorced, unemployed, at least temporarily, living with her sister, about to testify in a criminal trial against the man she'd once loved. But she was alive, clear-headed, safe, stronger than she'd ever been in some ways. She'd survived something that had been designed to destroy her. She'd fought back with intelligence and determination. She'd saved her own life. The trial would be hard. The publicity would be invasive. The process of testifying, of having her life examined and questioned, would be traumatic. But Jasmine was ready. She'd been preparing for this for months. She had truth and evidence on her side. More than that, she had purpose. Other women had reached out, sharing their stories, asking for advice, thanking her for speaking up. Jasmine had started thinking about what came after the trial. Maybe advocacy work, maybe writing about her experience, maybe finding a way to turn this nightmare into something that could help others recognize the signs, escape sooner, protect themselves. Devon had tried to erase her, to reduce her to a manageable variable in his sick equation. Instead, he'd made her stronger. more aware, more determined to fight back against men who thought they could control and destroy women without consequences. The fire was burning low now, both literally and metaphorically. The immediate crisis had passed. The battle ahead was legal and procedural, not life or death. Jasmine would testify. The jury would deliberate. Devon would likely spend the next several decades in prison. And Jasmine would move forward, scarred but surviving, damaged but not destroyed. She pulled out her phone and pulled up her email. There was one from Patricia. Enrollment at her old school was up, and several parents had specifically asked if Ms. Williams would be returning next year. There was one from Kesha, just checking in, sending love, reminding Jasmine she wasn't alone. There was one from Dr. Williams, a journal prompt for this week's therapy session. And there was one from the prosecution team. Subject line, final pre-trial briefing. The trial started in 20 days. Time to prepare. Time to face Devon one more time. Not as his victim, but as the woman who'd outsmarted him, outmaneuvered him, and brought him to justice. Jasmine opened the email and started reading. The jury had been selected. The opening statements were drafted. The evidence was organized and ready for presentation. Everything was in place. In 20 days, she would walk into that courtroom. She would take the stand. She would tell her story, calmly, factually, powerfully. She would look Devon in the eye and show him that she'd survived, that she'd won. And then, finally, she could start to heal, start to rebuild, start to move forward into whatever came next. The fire was burning, the case was open, and Jasmine was ready to render the verdict. So that's the complete story. Every detail, every complication, every moment from the coffee shop meet cute to the impending criminal trial. You've heard it all. The romance that was really a con, the vitamins that were really drugs, the loving husband who was really a calculating would-be murderer. Now it's your turn to decide who was in the wrong here. The answer seems obvious, right? Devon drugged his wife, planned to kill her for insurance money, systematically destroyed her autonomy and nearly her life. He's clearly the villain in this story, but is it that simple? Some might argue Jasmine stayed too long, that she took unnecessary risks by gathering evidence instead of leaving immediately, that she put herself in danger by continuing to live with Devon while building her case, that a smarter, more cautious person would have run the moment they suspected something was wrong. Others might question why she didn't notice sooner, why she accepted the vitamins without questioning them for months, why she rationalized Devon's controlling behaviors instead of recognizing them as red flags, whether her own naivete and trusting nature made her complicit in what happened to her. These are the questions that'll divide opinion. These are the moral gray areas that make this story complicated despite the clear-cut crime at its center. Because while Devon is unquestionably guilty of terrible things, the conversation around victim behavior, personal responsibility, and when we should trust versus when we should suspect, those conversations are messy and uncomfortable and don't have easy answers. Before you cast your verdict, let's break down the psychology behind what we just witnessed. Because understanding how this happened, mechanically, psychologically, systematically, is crucial to recognizing it when it happens to you or someone you love. You've heard the story, you feel the anger, the confusion, maybe even the disbelief. But do you know exactly what happened to your brain just now? Do you understand the specific psychological weapons Devon used to dismantle Jasmine's reality? Let's expose the machinery underneath the drama. What Devon did to Jasmine has a name, multiple names actually, because it was a layered campaign of psychological manipulation combined with literal chemical warfare. But the primary weapon, the one that made everything else possible, was a particularly insidious form of abuse called coercive control. Coercive control isn't about one dramatic incident. It's not a single slap or a clear threat. It's a systematic pattern of behavior designed to strip away a person's autonomy so gradually they don't even realize it's happening. Think of it like a frog in boiling water. If you drop the frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cold water and slowly turn up the heat, it doesn't notice the temperature change until it's too late. Here's how it works mechanically. Step 1. Establish yourself as the primary source of care and concern. Devon did this beautifully. He was attentive, thoughtful, remembered details, positioned himself as Jasmine's protector and advocate. He made himself indispensable to her sense of security and well-being. This created dependency before there was any obvious reason for dependency. Step 2. Introduce the control mechanism while framing it as care. The vitamins were genius, in a horrifying way. Devon didn't force them on Jasmine. He suggested them out of concern for her health. He backed up his suggestion with research. He made it seem like he was helping, not controlling. And because Jasmine trusted him, because he'd spent months establishing himself as trustworthy, she accepted them without question. Step 3. Create the problem you're pretending to solve. The fatigue, the memory issues, the confusion. Devon caused all of it with the drugs, but then he used those symptoms to justify even more control. You're too tired to go out tonight. You're too scattered to make this decision. You need me to take care of things for you. He created her vulnerability and then exploited it while positioning himself as her savior. Step 4. Isolate the target from outside reality checks. Notice how Devon subtly discouraged Jasmine from seeing Keisha, from attending social events, from maintaining relationships outside their marriage, always with plausible excuses, always framed as concern. But the effect was to cut off Jasmine from people who might notice the changes in her behavior and question what was happening. Remember when Jasmine mentioned the vitamins to Kesha during brunch, and Kesha immediately questioned whether they were working? That's the reality check Devon needed to prevent. So he started suggesting that Kesha was demanding, that she didn't understand Jasmine's needs, that maybe some distance from the friendship would be healthy. Isolate the target, control the narrative. Most people missed that this was already happening by point 2 of the story. Go back and look. When Devon suggested the vitamins, Jasmine had been feeling exhausted. But why? The story established she was stressed from work, but teaching is always stressful. She'd been doing it for years. What changed? Nothing changed except Devon's level of access to her daily life. They'd moved in together. He was handling her morning routine. He had control over her environment. The exhaustion likely started before the vitamins. Devon probably began the drugging earlier, maybe in her coffee, establishing the symptoms so he could then offer the solution. The vitamins were just the visible mechanism. The control started long before Jasmine realized anything was wrong. This brings us to why Jasmine couldn't just walk away. Why she didn't leave the moment she suspected something was wrong. The answer is cognitive dissonance combined with trauma bonding, 2 psychological phenomena that trap abuse victims more effectively than any lock or chain. Cognitive dissonance is what happens when your brain holds 2 contradictory beliefs simultaneously and has to resolve the conflict. In Jasmine's case, Devon loves me and wants to protect me, versus Devon is drugging me and destroying my autonomy. These beliefs can't both be true, so her brain tries to resolve the contradiction, usually by dismissing or minimizing the evidence that contradicts the more comfortable belief. This is why Jasmine rationalized Devon's behavior for so long, why she told herself the memory problems were just stress, why she accepted his explanations when things didn't add up. Her brain was trying to protect her from the devastating truth that the person she loved most was her abuser. It's not weakness or stupidity. It's a normal psychological response to an impossible situation. Trauma bonding made it even worse. When someone alternates between causing you harm and providing comfort, your brain creates an intense attachment to that person. It's related to intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive. You never know when you're going to get the reward, Devon being kind and caring, versus the punishment, Devon being controlling or causing confusion. So your brain becomes hyper-alert to his moods and increasingly desperate for the positive interactions. Devon didn't drug Jasmine every day from the start. He was strategic about it. Some days, she probably got real vitamins or lower doses. Some days, she felt normal, clear, like her old self. And on those days, she'd think, "See, everything's fine, I was just being paranoid." Those moments of clarity actually reinforced the trap because they made the fog days seem like random bad luck rather than a pattern. Let's go back to point 5, where Jasmine discovered the first notebook. Her immediate reaction was to try to rationalize it. Maybe it's research for a novel. Maybe there's an explanation. Her brain was desperately searching for any interpretation that didn't mean the man she loved was destroying her. That's cognitive dissonance in action. But here's what makes Jasmine's response extraordinary. She fought through it. Instead of letting cognitive dissonance win, instead of accepting the comfortable lies, she gathered evidence. She documented. She tested her reality by stopping the pills and seeing if her symptoms improved. She used her training as a teacher, someone who analyzes texts and builds arguments, to analyze her own life and build a case against her abuser. The moment she decided to stop taking the pills and see what happened, that was the moment she took back control. That was the moment the fog started to lift. Within days, she went from victim to investigator, from someone being acted upon to someone taking action. This is crucial to understand. Jasmine saved herself, not the police, not her friends, not luck. She recognized something was wrong. She gathered irrefutable evidence, and she built a case that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The only reason Devon is facing justice is because Jasmine refused to be a passive victim. But let's address the elephant in the room. Should she have gathered evidence, or should she have run immediately? This is where opinions diverge, and it's worth examining both sides. The argument for leaving immediately. When you suspect someone is trying to kill you, you get out. You don't stay to collect evidence. You don't put yourself in continued danger. You run, you report, you let the professionals handle it. Jasmine took enormous risks by continuing to live with Devon while secretly documenting his crimes. If he'd caught her, if he'd realized she'd stopped taking the pills, if he'd accelerated his timeline, she could have died. The argument for what Jasmine did, without evidence, it's her word against his. Devon was smart, charming, careful. If Jasmine had left with just a suspicion and a few pills, what would the police have done? Investigated, maybe. But Devon would have had explanations. The vitamins were just vitamins. Jasmine was stressed and paranoid. The notebooks were creative writing exercises. Without documentation, without the video evidence, without his own written murder plan, it becomes he said, she said. And historically, the justice system doesn't do well with he said, she said in abuse cases. Both positions have merit. Both reflect different values, immediate safety versus long-term justice. There's no universally right answer. What matters is that Jasmine made the choice that felt right for her, that aligned with her skills and her understanding of what she needed to prove. And it worked. Devon is in jail. The evidence is airtight. Justice is being served. But let's talk about the most disturbing element of Devon's plan, the life insurance policy. This moves beyond psychological abuse into premeditated murder. This is where Devon stopped being just a controlling husband and became a would-be killer. The life insurance scheme shows calculation and planning. Devon didn't just want to control Jasmine, he wanted to profit from her death. $2 million. That was the value he assigned to her life. Not sentimental value, not human value, but literal cash value. And he'd planned it meticulously. Get the policy in place while she was drugged and compliant. Establish a pattern of her being forgetful and unreliable. Create medical documentation of her deteriorating mental state. Set up the narrative that she was unstable, possibly suicidal, definitely not in control of her faculties. Then arrange an accident, probably an overdose, something that could be explained as either suicide or accidental death of a mentally ill woman who wasn't managing her medications properly. The insurance company would investigate, of course. They always do with large payouts. But Devon had built the perfect cover story. Grieving widower who'd tried everything to help his declining wife. Medical records backing up her instability. Witnesses, friends, family, colleagues, who'd all noticed she seemed off lately. Maybe even testimony that she'd been forgetful, confused, not herself. All the pieces in place for the insurance company to rule it a tragic accident or suicide and pay out the claim. Except Jasmine threw a wrench in the whole plan by being smarter than Devon gave her credit for, by paying attention, by trusting her instincts when something felt wrong, by having the courage and the clarity to investigate her own life. Now let's synthesize these two concepts, coercive control and financial motivation. When you combine the psychological warfare with the profit motive, you get a complete picture of what Devon was doing. This wasn't passion or rage or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated long-term project with Jasmine as the subject and $2 million as the prize. The coercive control was the method, the life insurance payout was the goal. And Jasmine was the obstacle to be systematically dismantled and eventually eliminated. If you've ever felt this confusion in your own life, if you've ever found yourself making excuses for someone's behavior, rationalizing their control as care, wondering if you're the crazy one, listen closely. These patterns are recognizable, these tactics have names, and understanding them can save your life. We usually only see red flags in the rearview mirror after we've already been hurt, after the relationship has already damaged us. Let's change that. Let's look at the 5 critical warning signs that appeared in Jasmine's story, signs that predict a dangerous escalation almost mathematically. Flag number 1. Love bombing that transitions to control. At the beginning of the story, when Devon and Jasmine first got together, Devon was attentive, romantic, thoughtful. He remembered details. He showed up when she needed him. He integrated into her life seamlessly. That looks like love. It feels like love. But there's a difference between genuine affection and love bombing, and it's in the intensity and the speed. Love bombing is overwhelming attention designed to create dependency and obligation. It's not, I care about you and want to know you better. It's, I'm going to be so perfect that you can't imagine life without me. Here's the test. Does this person's care feel proportional to how long you've known them, or does it feel excessive? Are they giving you space to reciprocate at your own pace, or are they pushing for rapid commitment and intimacy? Do they respect your boundaries and your independence, or do they subtly encourage you to rely on them more and more? In Jasmine's case, Devon was helpful, fixing her car, showing up to support events, handling things she found stressful. At first glance, perfect partner behavior. But look closer, he was making himself indispensable. He was positioning himself as the solution to all her problems, the person she couldn't function without. When someone makes themselves indispensable early in a relationship, that's not love. That's strategy. Healthy partners encourage your independence and competence. Dangerous partners create situations where you need them. If you see this pattern, overwhelming early attention that gradually shifts into subtle control, pause and ask yourself, am I being loved or am I being managed? Flag number 2, concern that masks control. Devon was always so concerned about Jasmine, concerned about her exhaustion, concerned about her stress levels, concerned about whether she was overextending herself with social commitments. His concern seemed caring, protective even, but concern that consistently results in you doing less, having less freedom, seeing fewer people, making fewer independent choices. That's not concern. That's control with good PR. The reveal. At point 3 of the story, when Devon suggested the vitamins, it looked like him taking care of her. Thoughtful research, a solution to her fatigue, genuine desire to help her feel better. Except the vitamins were causing the problem they claimed to solve. He created her exhaustion through drugging, then offered the solution that made it worse, all while positioning himself as her caring protector. This is the textbook abuser's playbook. Create the problem, offer the solution, use both to tighten control. The test. When someone expresses concern about you, does their concern empower you to take care of yourself? Or does it position them as the only one who can take care of you? Does their worry result in you having more autonomy or less? Does their protection expand your world or shrink it? Healthy concern. You seem tired. Have you talked to your doctor? What can I do to support you in taking care of yourself? Controlling concern. You seem tired. You shouldn't push yourself. Maybe skip that event. Let me handle this for you. You can't trust yourself to make good decisions right now. See the difference? One empowers, one diminishes, one treats you as capable, one treats you as fragile and dependent. If someone's concern consistently results in you having less freedom, less confidence, less independence, that's not love, that's control, and it will escalate. Flag number 3, reality distortion and gaslighting. This is the point where a boundary violation occurred. Jasmine started noticing memory problems, exhaustion, time gaps. When she mentioned these concerns to Devon, his response was to validate that something was wrong, but to frame it as her medical issue, not something being done to her. Maybe you should see a doctor, maybe it's something serious. This positioned Jasmine's very real symptoms as her body failing her, not as evidence of being drugged. It made her doubt her own perceptions and trust his interpretation of her reality instead. When the doctor's tests came back normal, Devon didn't accept that as good news. He pushed for more tests, more specialists, more medical intervention. Why? Because a medical diagnosis would have further cemented the narrative that Jasmine was unstable, unreliable, not competent to manage her own life. This flag makes the victim doubt their own sanity. It's the most insidious form of abuse because it attacks your fundamental sense of reality. If you can't trust your own mind, your own memories, your own perceptions, then you become completely dependent on your abuser to tell you what's real. Jasmine experienced this acutely when the Marcus texts appeared on her phone. Flirty messages from someone she didn't know, making her question whether she'd had conversations she couldn't remember, whether she'd done things while in her fog state. Looking back, those texts were almost certainly from Devon, another layer of gaslighting to make her doubt herself even more. The counter move: document your reality. Keep a journal, take screenshots, create a record of what you remember, when you remember it. If someone is consistently telling you that your memory is wrong, that you're confused, that you're overreacting, and you don't have a medical condition that would explain these issues, trust yourself. Your perception is valid. Your memory matters. Don't let anyone rewrite your reality. Flag number 4, isolation disguised as protection. Go back to point 4 when the tension was rising. Notice how Devon consistently discouraged Jasmine from seeing Kesha, from attending social events, from maintaining connections outside their relationship. He never forbade it. That would be too obvious. Instead, he expressed concern. Kesha's going through a lot. Maybe give her space. You're so tired. Maybe skip this event and rest. Another work happy hour? You were just out last week.
I worry about you overdoing it. Every suggestion reasonable on its face. But the cumulative effect was to shrink Jasmine's world down to just her and Devon, to cut her off from people who might notice the changes in her behavior and question what was happening, to eliminate outside reality checks. This is how abusers maintain control.
They isolate their victims from anyone who might challenge the narrative, who might offer a different perspective, who might help the victim escape. And they do it gradually, subtly, always with plausible deniability. I never stopped you from seeing your friends. I just thought you needed rest. I wasn't trying to isolate you. I was protecting you from stress. The reality is that social isolation is one of the strongest predictors of escalating abuse. When someone is cut off from their support system, they're vulnerable. They have no one to reality check their experiences, no one to offer perspective, no one to help them leave if things get dangerous. If you notice a partner consistently discouraging your outside relationships, even if their reasons seem caring, that's a red flag. Healthy partners want you to have rich, full lives that include them, not lives that revolve exclusively around them. Flag number 5, the deadly escalation. This is the final warning sign before the climax, the point of no return. For Jasmine, it was overhearing Devon's phone conversation about her being out cold and discussing dosages. That was the moment when suspicion became certainty, when concern became terror. The point of no return in an abusive relationship is when you realize your partner isn't just controlling you, they're planning to destroy you. When the emotional abuse has a clear trajectory toward physical danger or financial ruin or systematic elimination of your autonomy. For Jasmine, that escalation was literal. Devon was planning her murder. But escalation can take many forms. Financial abuse ramping up to draining accounts, emotional abuse escalating to threats of violence, isolation, deepening to the point where you have no one to turn to and no resources to escape. The warning sign is when you stop making excuses and start feeling afraid, when some deep survival instinct kicks in and says, "This person is dangerous. I am not safe. I need to get out." Trust that instinct. It's not paranoia. It's not overreaction. It's your brain recognizing a pattern and trying to protect you. Now let me synthesize all 5 flags. You have the facts from the story. The systematic drugging, the manipulation, the planned murder. You have the motive from the psychology, control, power, and $2 million in insurance money. You have the evidence from the red flags. Love bombing that became control. Concern that masked abuse, reality distortion, isolation, and deadly escalation. You are the jury in this case. I am handing you the gavel. The question before you is not just who was wrong, because Devon's guilt is clear and documented. The deeper question is, what do we owe to victims of this kind of abuse? What responsibility do we bear as friends, family, colleagues, to notice the signs and speak up? How do we create a world where Jasmines don't have to save themselves because the systems around them have already protected them? Jasmine did everything right. She recognized the danger. She gathered evidence. She built an airtight case. She protected herself and potentially countless future victims. But she shouldn't have had to be that smart, that brave, that strategic to survive her own marriage. So as you render your verdict, think about what you can do differently, how you can pay closer attention to the people you love, how you can create space for them to share their truth without judgment, how you can be the reality check they might desperately need. The comments are going to be split on whether Jasmine handled this perfectly or should have done things differently. That's okay. That's part of the conversation we need to have. But what isn't up for debate is this. Devon Williams systematically abused his wife, planned her murder, and deserves every consequence coming to him. Jasmine survived because she refused to be a passive victim. She turned the tools of her profession, research, analysis, documentation, evidence-based argumentation, into weapons of self-defense. She outsmarted a man who thought he was smarter. She survived a situation designed to destroy her. Now you must decide. Is this a tragedy of errors or calculated manipulation? Is there any moral ambiguity here? Or is it clear-cut? What would you have done in Jasmine's position? Would you have run or gathered evidence? Would you have trusted your instincts sooner or rationalized them away? I am handing the gavel to you. The case is closed. The evidence is presented. Court is adjourned. See you in the comments.